So good evening to everyone. My apologies that the email came late today. I was out of the office and I sent it from my phone, but apparently it didn't go through. So many of you have received the email, the reminder email about today's session just a little while ago. So we'll wait for another 5 minutes and see if more people can come in. The recording is on. And we will get started in a few minutes. I'm going to begin with two quick videos on YouTube, which you guys will have in the course schedule as well. So you can always go back in and re-access those. So wait just a couple more minutes. Sorry, everyone, that's my cat. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Once again, I'll say one other time, I apologize for the email coming, the reminder email coming so late. I sent it earlier, but I was out of the office and or out of the house, and it looks like it didn't go through from my phone. So my apologies for that. I imagine other people will be joining us as we get started here. And I know some of you probably have courses and other things that you need to do later on. So if you may need to leave in the middle of this session this evening, I know it's going to be kind of a long one. So please go ahead. But we're really glad that you joined us again for the second day. Apparently I didn't scare too many of you off yesterday, so that's good. I wanted to start with a couple of videos. And as I mentioned a minute ago, these videos are available on YouTube and they're listed in the course program. So you're welcome to go back in and watch them again at your leisure. So let me share my screen. Let me first admit. So this first one is about 2.5 minutes long, and it's about kind of just a couple general things on startup ecosystems. What is a startup ecosystem? So it'll be a little bit of a reinforcement of what we covered yesterday. And then I have one that's all about Y Combinator, which we spent a little time talking about yesterday as well. And then we'll jump into the material. So just a second here. Okay, is everybody seeing my screen now?
Yes.
All righty. Okay, I'll get this started. Now, I hope if there's a problem with the sound, please let me know, but you should all be able to hear it.
You've probably heard of startups and scale-ups, innovative companies with the DNA to scale up quickly and make a big impact. But what exactly do these companies do? And what's a startup ecosystem? Let's have a look at why these companies are so important for our economy and society. In comparison to other companies, the number of startups and scale-ups is relatively small. But at the same time, their innovative strength is huge. Besides employment opportunities at the companies themselves, a single job at a startup also creates 5 indirect jobs at all levels of education. Additionally, startups often deliver a higher return on investment and an increase in productivity. But the newly created dynamic is the most important benefit. Startups and scale-ups encourage existing companies and sectors to innovate as well. They form partnerships to work on a better world, for example, in the field of digitalization and sustainability. A startup is a company with the ambition to grow nationally or internationally. It is based on a scalable business model and driven by technology that is self-developed or otherwise new. Once a startup moves into the next stage, we call it a scale-up. Now the company expands quickly and has a proven revenue model and paying customers. The exponential growth of the company is typical for a scale-up, with the customer base, the workforce, and turnover increasing substantially for a number of years. A startup goes through various growth stages. In every stage, it needs a different type of support from its ecosystem. In addition to the startup community, the startup ecosystem consists of various organizations that include educational institutions, government agencies, investors, and incubators. They all work together to create an environment that allows innovative startups to grow and develop into scale-ups. Founded in Friesland and founded in Groningen have a neutral role in the ecosystem with the aim to connect parties. Together with our partners, we ensure that the startup ecosystem is accessible for entrepreneurial talent and startup founders. Subsequently, we provide the support they need for their next step to conquer the world.
Okay, so that was just a quick sort of overview of startup ecosystems. A lot of it similar to what we covered yesterday. And the people who made the video, the two companies that made the video, they're called Founded in Groningen and Founded in Friesland. And those are two areas in Germany that are trying to really boost up their entrepreneurial activity. So these are sort of what we call ecosystem enablers, where they actually are trying to help individual startups, but also help grow the whole ecosystem as well. So the next one I want to show is actually about Y Combinator. And if you actually give me one quick second, I need to take a very quick screenshot here. So just bear with me since we're starting the class. All righty, great. And I will queue up the other video too. Sorry about that. It's interesting. One of the things that we were mentioning yesterday about how ecosystems grow and startups can actually then contribute to more job growth and more spin-offs and things. A good example is Zoom itself. Zoom was a startup, and obviously they started small. They thought they had a really great technology. They grew it, and thanks to the pandemic, it was a huge multiplier in terms of their growth as a company and as a service. And that massive growth also led to a lot of other companies, new startups, small startups, that were building products to be used specifically on Zoom. So Zoom now has its own kind of ecosystem around it of other smaller startups that are helping to move the entire Zoom technology suite forward. So that's a good example of the kind of the network effect that happens when a startup goes to become a very successful scale up, and then generates a lot of growth around it. Okay, so as we mentioned yesterday, the kind of the original pioneer of the acceleration program, especially with the equity model, is called Y Combinator, and they're located in Mountain View, California. They have a very long track record, as we said. We spent a lot of time with that yesterday, and I wanted to kind of put it into perspective a little bit with this video as well. So I'll show that, and then we'll jump into the presentation material. And as I mentioned, all of these videos will be obviously available for you guys to watch whenever you like at your leisure.
So many bright ideas.
Sorry.
In the startup world, there are so many bright ideas that often go on to become some of the biggest and best companies and products around the world. But more often than not, those companies and products wouldn't have got to where they are today without some kind of funding to kickstart the business, helping the idea to grow. So today we're looking at Y Combinator, an American seed money startup accelerator which launched in March 2005. Ever heard of Stripe, Reddit, Twitch, Airbnb, DoorDash, or Dropbox? Thought you might have. All these companies saw funding through the Y Combinator Accelerator program, which saw them become behemoths in their sectors. And there's over 2,000 other companies that have taken the same journey. But what actually is Y Combinator? What does the program consist of? And how did Y Combinator become one of the most sought-after venture accelerators in the world? Here's how it happened. Y Combinator today is known for providing seed funding for startups, early stage capital that pays the bills to get the business going. They run 2 3-month programs in Silicon Valley where they invest around $120,000 in startups they think will succeed, acquiring small stakes and getting the startups correctly set up legally to help with future funding and success. During the 3-month program, they work intensively with companies, getting them into shape and refining pitches for potential investors. But initially, when the business first started, things were quite different. Y Combinator was founded in 2005 by Paul Graham, Jessica Livingston, Trevor Blackwell, and Robert Tappan Morris. The group came together after either trying to join a VC fund or begin angel investing, thinking, why not do it ourselves? Graham put in $100,000, Blackwell and Morris put in $50,000.
I think it's a problem with the sound. We do not hear.
Yes, no sound.
On their startup.
I'm sorry.
It was a good enough
No.
reason not
Shall I
to
go?
do
I'll go
it.
back. Sorry, where did it stop?
So they quit her job to join them in running the business, and thus why Trevor Blackwell and Robert Tappan Morris. The group came together after either trying to join a VC fund or begin angel investing, thinking, why not do it ourselves? Graham put in 100,000, Blackwell and Morris put in 50,000 each, and Livingston quit her job to join them in running the business, and thus Y Combinator, or Cambridge Seed as it was initially known, was founded. Y Combinator decided they wanted to fund startups synchronously. Not because it would be better, but because they wanted to learn how to be angel investors. And by convincing undergrads to spend their summer working on their startup, they felt it was a good enough reason not to feel guilty encouraging them to do it. So they launched the Summer Founders Program in 2005 and found that the length and structure of a summer program was perfect. So much so that it hasn't really changed to this day. When they first launched, the founders came up with the Y Combinator effect, which described the moment that someone realized that YC wasn't actually that lame. The first summer, people who came to speak felt it was like a Boy Scout talk, but by the time they left, they actually thought some of the companies might succeed. That's why YC likes funding companies that are considered a bit silly, because that's how they were dismissed originally. Initially, they started running 2 programs per year, one in Boston and another in Silicon Valley, choosing the latter because of the weather, the density of startup people, and they didn't want anyone else to copy their idea and become the YC of Silicon Valley. They only just managed to get a building in Mountain View, and the first dinner, they had to tell founders not to touch the walls because the paint was still wet. So far from perfect.
If you want to start
Oh,
class and sell
sorry.
more, go to lucia.com and join the party. Introducing Lucia.
But by 2009, they cancelled the Boston program to focus all their resources on Silicon Valley. And that same year, Sequoia Capital led a $2 million investment round to enable Y Combinator to invest in 60 companies per year. And 1 year later, they led an $8.25 million funding round to increase that number of investments. Out of 8,000 applicants, around 300 startups get invited to fly out for an interview. Once accepted to the program, the firms receive a $120,000 investment for 7% of the business, and the 12-week program begins. Successful applicants fly out to Silicon Valley to set themselves up to work on their business 24/7, in what many describe is their most productive 12 weeks of their lives. Despite this, the program itself only consists of about 3 formal occasions: a weekly dinner, office hours with the Y Combinator team, and demo day. The weekly dinner consists of getting all the startups together into a cafeteria-style room with a stage in the middle upon which well-known speakers, such as Mark Zuckerberg, Michael Bloomberg, and Andrew Mason, have spoken, with someone different for each dinner. The office hours consist of discussing business plans, launching the business, pitch preparation, the future, and figuring out how to bring products and services out to the public. These office hours are key in the build-up to demo day to plan and prepare, but they're available to every business all year round. Even those who came through the Y Combinator machine 15 years ago still speak to the partners often. Towards the end of the program, Y Combinator take their equity stake in the business, which values the startup at $1.7 million, more or less, and the 3-month program then culminates in Demo Day, which has grown from a crowd of 15 people in 2005 to over 1,000 investors today. So it's kind of a big deal. In the room are numerous startup investors, possibly the highest concentration all in one room that you'd find anywhere in the world, all looking for the next big thing. As far as startups themselves are concerned, there's nothing specific they need to say or do. They're all at different stages after all. The goal is purely to present their product or service as convincingly as possible in 2.5 minutes, which might lead to further introductory talks post-presentation. Y Combinator then help with the fundraising process, helping them understand who the most reliable investors are and which might be the best fit. This, coupled with the fact that the startups are already known quantities, means that it sometimes leads to higher valuations due to serious price competition. Even if the startups don't come away with any funding, they have at least gained great contacts with whom to restart discussions at a later date. And despite a common query being that YC doesn't fund solo founders, it's a misconception. Every year, over 10% of businesses funded have solo founders. But that being said, they do suggest bringing on co-founders or a wider team, because at the end of the day, with all things being equal, it's just a lot easier to start a company as part of a team. You might be sat there thinking that the main takeaway is funding, and that is a very important part of the process, but there's more to Y Combinator than just a cash injection. In fact, many of the startups that pass through Y Combinator don't actually need the money. It obviously helps to keep the lights on, but that's not what they came for. The partners work side by side with the founders, helping them to see the direction in which their business should go, and they answer all questions, from the obscene to the mundane. The Y Combinator effect also means that investors will treat YC startups well if they want to be invited back for future opportunities. Y Combinator also help with legal documentation, patents, and if necessary, mediate disputes between disgruntled co-founders. The other often unseen part is the massive alumni network of startup founders, through which you can find a place to stay, a freelance employee, or a connection at a specific company. Y Combinator themselves see this as an amazing byproduct they didn't even think of at first, but funding startups every 6 months evidently creates a huge network. Y Combinator has now been running for over 15 years and has put over 2,000 businesses through its rigorous process, and it's been worth it, with around 20 businesses being valued in excess of $1 billion. It affects so many startups that it almost acts as an index fund for the VC world, offering great exposure, but at the same time, they try to interfere as little as possible, not taking board seats and allowing all businesses to act independently. Because more often than not, one of the main factors for someone launching a startup in the first place is independence. And that's how it happened. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so that's the slightly more developed story of Y Combinator. It's, as we said, pretty much the industry standard. Started everything, and who knows, it may be the last one around when if they absorb all the other accelerators. Before we go into the course material, I did also want to sort of say a little bit about the difference between a business accelerator that works with technology types of startups, okay, so really scalable or wanting to be scalable startups, versus a business accelerator that works with more small or medium enterprise kind of minded businesses. So that can be anywhere from a local program that is helping to accelerate entrepreneurship in the community, to it can even be on a larger scale as well. But the idea is that you have a slightly different approach depending on whether you're working with scalable startups or whether you're working with smaller, more localized businesses. Both of them can benefit from an acceleration program. Both of them can, because again, the main points of an acceleration program is to get you to either a more successful design point in terms of the business, right? So you have a better, more realistic financial plan. You may have a marketing plan. You understand how you're going to attract your first customers, and you've got your product in a better shape to actually sell to those first customers. Now that holds true whether you're opening a bakery or a restaurant or a small service business, along with if you're opening a technology-based startup that's going to scale. So scale, the word scale and scalability is actually quite relative. And any business that wants to survive is going to need to grow in some way. So that growth, that scaling, right, again, should be relative to the market that they're looking to operate in. So again, if you're talking about a smaller, more localized business, you can use the same processes that we use with technology startups. For instance, customer research, understanding the market needs more, understanding your competition, looking at what the possibilities are for you to expand even further than you had originally thought, all of those things, and understanding how your product is going to differentiate itself from the rest of the competing products out there. So that holds true just as much for a small business as it does for a technology company. And I know that in many countries, especially where there's not a really, really large technology industry already, oftentimes people begin the business building process in a slightly small, let's say not smaller mindset, but their mindset tends to think much more locally, right? So, or they're thinking that they're going to do something that's going to take over the entire world, which, you know, that may also not be quite so realistic. So it's important to look at an accelerator program as a place where you're going to teach the fundamentals of business and then apply those fundamentals in whatever is the most appropriate way for the local community that you're working with, whether that community is a bunch of computer programmers, or whether that community is a much more varied group of people, or whether that community is more agricultural, let's say, and is looking to do something that has more of a focus on agriculture. So that's just kind of a caveat, let's say. Yesterday we spent a lot of time talking about scaling with technology and so forth, but I wanted to kind of throw that out there that, you know, you don't have to be the next Zoom or, you know, the next Uber, let's say, or anything else. It can be a startup company can be accelerated that is not going to take over the world. It can just take over the neighborhood, and that's just fine. The point is to give the founders as many tools as they can absorb. Sorry, my cat's having a little problem here. So that their chances of success are increased a lot, or so that they understand that maybe this idea is not going to work and I'm not going to invest any more time and resources in pushing it. I'm going to go on and find something else that will work. So that's the point there. Okay, so now we'll go back to the presentation that we had yesterday that I had stopped in the middle here. And, or towards the beginning. Can everybody see my screen now?
Milo's fur is very...
Oh, I think that's still YouTube in there. Just a second and I'll shut that off. Or maybe that's one of you guys. Hold on a second here. There we go. Okay. All right, so we left off yesterday. Just to remind you, we left off yesterday talking about many of the benefits that acceleration programs can bring. And I think both of those videos kind of touched on that as well. They definitely talked about, you know, how you can improve the entrepreneurial capacity of your founders. Like we said just now, help the businesses either fail early or succeed faster. And obviously, and this is especially true in programs like Y Combinator, to really leverage the network that comes with an entrepreneurial ecosystem and also with an acceleration program. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what works and what doesn't when you're designing or setting up an acceleration program. And some of that has to do with how you plan your first resources, how you plan the resources that you will have to give to your founders, but also the resources that you will have to offer back to the community again. And a lot of times in the beginning, entrepreneurs don't really know what kinds of resources they need or how to even formulate those needs. Sometimes they don't even know quite how to talk about them. And many times, as we said yesterday, also there can be issues of trust. So as the coordinators of an acceleration program, it's your job to kind of break down those barriers, dig a little bit, try and understand what their needs are, what their backgrounds are, and so forth. And the earlier that you can recognize this and begin to guide them, the better off everyone is, because you know, you're obviously going to have a lot more time and resources available to them that are correct, right? If you have a situation where the founders are not able to communicate their needs well, and you're just guessing, and well, let's see, you know, why don't you try this and why don't you try that? It can lead to a lot of frustration. So we try and really, as much as possible, explore their needs, both through the application process, as we discussed yesterday, in terms of the questions that you ask and the materials that you ask them to submit when they're applying, as well as in the very beginning, the first couple of sessions where you're really sort of, getting to know them and digging as deep as you can to the state of their business idea and what it will take to move them forward. Many times, the people that apply to acceleration programs, entrepreneurs and people who are wanting to become entrepreneurs, have a somewhat mistaken, let's say, or different view of the standards that are held by possible investors. And many times they're not really sure what role an early stage investor is going to play. That's, sort of, we see investors in many situations, in many acceleration programs. People see investors in the beginning as, some guy who's just going to come in with a checkbook and pass out money. This is not necessarily true. It's very important when you're beginning the program to set some expectations about what is investable, what is attractive to investors based on those investors that you have close to you. Okay, and again, we always try and root things in the close reality where the program is, because obviously the standards of an investor that's operating in Silicon Valley are going to be very different than the standards of an investor who's operating in maybe a smaller ecosystem. And they all want to see quality of a certain level and readiness of a certain level. But some investors are able to overlook certain things based upon their knowledge of the local ecosystem. So a lot of times, if startup founders haven't been advised in advance of what the expectations are of the investors, then they'll be unpleasantly surprised towards the end. Or they also will do things like set the value of their company very, very high, right? They'll have an unrealistic valuation of their company and say, well, I have this super, super great idea and I've done this business plan and I think my company is worth 2 million euros, for instance. So in the beginning, it's very, very important to set, like I said, set expectations about what your investors are looking for. And then also when you're designing the program and when you're implementing the program, obviously reinforce those expectations with the kind of curriculum that you're using and the design that's going through. And then finally, another issue that happens with founders in regards to investors is they don't have a realistic plan of how they're going to use the money that they're asking for. So the what we call the ask, which is in part of the pitch deck, it's one of the very most important parts of the pitch deck that your founders will ultimately make at the end. The funds that they're asking for need to be accounted for in not a huge amount of detail, but in enough detail so that people who are considering investing understand how much money is going to sales, how much money is going to be used to operate the business in the first year, how much money is going to be spent on marketing, and so forth. And those kinds of numbers also will be worked on within the acceleration program. So you'll be helping the startups to set realistic goals and realistic budgets for different parts of their business. Staying on the track of investors as well, a lot of times they're, especially in the beginning, if you haven't been able to communicate the expectations really well or set the expectations well with the startup founders, sometimes they make some sort of basic mistakes with investors, and these can lead to disappointment. So for instance, if a startup is reluctant to share information about their product or their business idea, that can look very very wrong to investors, because investors typically will not fund just an idea, and they want to they want to know that the startup founder has enough confidence in their product that they're ready to talk about it. Sometimes that investors will take a much harsher approach to the startups, and they may ask for further things like a further mentoring or more difficult kinds of questions that could lead to some uncomfortable questioning, let's say, on the part of the startup founder, thinking, well, why is this guy or this woman, why are they asking me these difficult questions? I don't, they may get a little defensive. That in the due diligence process, which is all about really the investor digging very, very deep into the startup and like reading through the intellectual property, understanding what the real technology is behind the product and so forth. Those kinds of processes can get a little tense sometimes. They can get difficult. And so if founders are not prepared for that and not expecting things to get a little hard, they can get very disappointed. And that can lead to them, either on the part of the founders or on the part of the investors, it can lead to blockages or people not wanting to go to the next step. They'll say, well, you know what, this is not a good relationship. It doesn't look like we're going to have a positive working relationship, so we're not going to go forward. Speaking of secrets and not wanting to reveal things, or being reluctant to share information, many times startup founders will ask for an NDA. That stands for a non-disclosure agreement in the beginning in order to join an acceleration program. And a non-disclosure agreement basically says, for those of you who don't know, basically just says that both parties agree that they won't say anything. They cannot disclose any of the information about the startup, what they're doing, or their product, or their technology. And it's a legally binding document, so it's something that is taken fairly seriously. Typically, acceleration programs will not use NDAs. They will not sign NDAs, and the reason for that is that you don't want to limit yourself as an acceleration program. You don't want to limit yourself to any one particular startup's version of an idea, meaning that there are many ways to approach solving problems and meeting needs. And it is common, in fact, that in an acceleration program, you will have 2 or 3 startups that are quite similar, that are maybe approaching a similar need or a similar problem, or they're using the same similar technology to solve different kinds of problems. And when you have an NDA, when you have to have an NDA with each and every single startup, it really limits your ability to help the individual startups, but also help them help each other. So typically that's not something that an NDA will, that's not something that an accelerator will do. Occasionally, if it's a very, very specific kind of technological secret or intellectual property that is very, very sensitive, then you can make exceptions. But in general, we certainly don't do NDAs very often, and it's not necessarily considered a best practice. So in the end, it's sort of up to the startup founders to kind of say, okay, am I going to take advantage of this program or not? They have to come to a good place with wanting to do this. And that's also very, very important, is that you don't want to feel that you're coercing anyone to join your acceleration program. You want them to be comfortable with it and be able to take all the benefits and also give back as well. So in the end, they have to be the ones to decide if they're going to play by the rules that you have or not. I see there's something in the chat. To be prepared even for complex questions. Yes, exactly. So let's, 1 second, sorry. Sorry, guys. Lots of windows open here. Okay. Mentoring inflation. Now, as part of your acceleration program, as we've kind of touched on, there will be mentoring for sure. When you're designing the program and kind of, reaching out to experts and industry leaders and so forth, people that you want to serve as mentors in your program, that's a very big part of what the acceleration program will offer. There is a little bit of a flip side to getting a lot of mentoring from the startup side. We call that mentoring inflation. And that typically happens when a startup will either participate in a lot of different programs or will seek out the advice and the mentoring of many, many, many different people. It's a very, very important and crucial part of the evolution of a startup that you have good mentors. But if you have too many, you risk having too much advice and having that become contradictory advice, because every expert is going to have their own take on something. And so one of the skills that you can teach within the program, as well as something that you can help to kind of design into the program by helping with the organization of mentoring sessions, is that startup founders should look for consistency in the advice that they're getting, not be afraid to hear contrary or contradictory advice from other mentors, but that they need to really focus on filtering as much as possible all of the input that they're getting and coming up with a consistent progress and idea based upon the advice that they're getting. I don't know if that makes sense or not. If there's too many, it's kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen, right? If you've got too many people trying to advise on how the dinner is going to be fixed, at a certain point, the chef just wants to throw up their hands and kick everybody out of the room so that they can get their job done. So as a program organizer or someone who's participating as a provider within an acceleration program, what's important is to keep your eye on the startups themselves and how they're responding to the mentoring process, and making sure that they are able to take the benefit of this advice without getting sort of swamped or drowning in too much and getting confused, because that just leads to a lot of frustration, and the frustration leads to paralysis, and that's not the place where you want them to be. And finally, when you have when you have a couple of advanced startups, oftentimes, let's say it's somebody who's working on a solution for medical technology, they're going to be probably much more benefited by participating in a specific and what we call a vertical accelerator that's much more focused on the specifics of their program itself, right? I mean, excuse me, of their sector itself. That will allow them to get much more focused mentoring and much more focused networking, and it will take the startup further along faster. One of the things to avoid, if you can, is having a lot of what we call cosmetic mentors or sort of traveling mentors, right? Or professional mentors, let's say. A lot of times there are people who are, they may be key opinion leaders, they may be very, very well-known industry experts and so forth. Having those people associated with your program is good on the one hand, because it definitely boosts the image of the program. But unless those people are really fully committed to devoting not just their photo and their name, but also lending their time and their knowledge to the program, then you actually risk losing credibility in the end, because it's very important, if you have these kind of big names or showcase mentors, that they're able to devote the amount of time that they pledge. Many people are very, very well-meaning. And a lot of people who are even, experts in their fields, experts in their particular, technological sector or so forth, they really want to help. But often, and this is a normal human characteristic, often we can overextend ourselves, and promising to help is not the same as delivering on that. So it's important to, you know, have the right kind of expectations, set the right kind of expectations with your mentors in the beginning, and have a, you know, a specific a contract, if you will, with them that says, okay, we expect from you, you know, 1 hour per week for the duration of the 12 weeks that we're here, and we will take care of scheduling how that 1 hour is used, but we need you to be available for this time, or some other way of quantifying what you expect from them. This is all very, very important from the beginning. And that's also helps you as an organizer. It helps you say to the startups, okay, you guys each get half an hour every 2 weeks with you know, with this person. She's the CEO of the, you know, medical device company, and she has committed to this much time. So that way everybody has their expectations set correctly from the beginning, and it leads to much less disappointment or confusion. Guidance is a very tricky thing, as we said before, and it's important that the program itself is providing well-structured and specific guidance, right? So if you have sort of sporadic guidance where you kind of helicopter into each team every week or so and kind of figure out what they're, you know, working on, and oh, well, let's get you set up with this person and let's try this. In the beginning, early stage startups especially need consistency. It's a very, very important thing to have in your program. So it's really good to have a schedule that's set up where you're working on one step each week, and those steps have been logically arranged so that one guides you to the next and the next and the next. Again, we mentioned how much time mentors are spending, but also where they're spending their time, on which step of the program are they the most important to pull in. Supporters' commitments is also a really, really important part of setting up the program. Supporters can be any kind of local support organization. It can be a company or an institution that's sponsoring the program. It can be even, you know, a public like a city, for instance, a municipality, or the national government may have funds set aside in some way. So it's really important, though, as you're setting up the program, to understand and quantify the specific commitment that all of those supporters are giving to you. And again, the same as with the mentors, you know, you really need to understand the actual ability, not so much the promised ability, but the actual ability of the organization that is going to support you. And is also their culture, because certain organizations will have their own agenda. They want to support the program for a reason. And so it's very important that we understand those reasons. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's very important to understand those reasons so that you have, you know what you're working with as an organizer. And so clear rules of engagement, right? Again, is super important. Set all of those expectations as much as you can, and then quantify everything as in the beginning, so that each entity, whether they're a supporter or a mentor or a startup, so that each of the entities know exactly what to expect. And this is even more important if you're dealing with any kind of equity situation where you're talking about actual, you know, partial ownership of a company being exchanged, or having people participate in owning the company. Because in the end, it's not just a casual exchange. When someone becomes a shareholder in the company, there's a legal relationship there, there's a business relationship there, and there's a cultural relationship there. And all of those things need to start out on the right foot. So, you know, educating your founders about those kinds of relationships is also really important. If you're working with local venture capital funds, it's very important to understand the true nature of their commitment. Right. So a lot of times, you know, you'll have, oh, well, that's great. Well, yeah, sure. We'll be on board. We'll support you. No problem. Unless there is a little bit of a harder commitment in writing that you can hold funders to. Sometimes, you know, they may forget about you or disappear when it comes time for demo day or so forth. So any kind of commitment level, pledges of commitment need to be quantified in writing in the beginning as you're setting up the program. Founders also, as we said earlier, you know, they have their own expectations. They have their own estimation of the quality and the potential of their startup idea. And oftentimes those expectations may not match what the expectations of funding entities have. So it's really important to kind of proactively deal with that in the course of your program. Sometimes you have a program that is actually got a VC formally backing the program, meaning that the fund itself is running the program. Obviously, that's a little bit of an exception. At that point, the VC is not going to back out of it. But in general, it's more, especially in early stage ecosystems, it's much more likely that you will have the kind of soft commitments from funding entities that are either local funds, local VC funds, or local public entities. Okay. We'll go another 5 minutes and then we'll take a quick break for 10 minutes and then we'll check on any questions before we keep going here. But so this is this last slide has to do with talent sourcing. And we mentioned a little bit about that yesterday, but it's a very, very important need, both for the startups and as well as for your acceleration program itself, right? Many, many times we have founders that come in, either founders of one or founders of, founding teams of one or two, who have a limited amount of either experience or skill to follow through on the actual execution of their idea. And so they're going to need to look for extra human capital, right? So they're going to need to find that either locally, sometimes internationally, sometimes teams can find other human capital remotely. That's now obviously becoming much more of a potential solution. But the idea of bringing in someone else to join a team when the business idea is still in evolution has both positive and negative sides to it, right? Because on the one hand, you bring in more brains and more skills, and so you're more likely to get further on down the road. But as we talked about yesterday, you don't always know that person, and you don't always know whether they share the same long-term goals and agenda as the initial founders. So that's something that as an organizer, you will also have to look out for and deal with while you're helping these founders try and find their co-founders, their other participants in starting their startup. Sometimes, and we've done this with several of our startups in the past, it can be a very useful solution if there's and this is typically done with technology, if there is a part of the product that cannot be built by the founding team. They either don't have the knowledge or they don't have the skills to build that part of the product. You can find either a company or another team that will do it for you, either in exchange for money, which is easy but not cheap, or in exchange for equity. And so at that point, you can start discussing whether or not another company, let's say your startup founders are trying to build an app, and they have all of the business part of it down. They've done all the market research. They've lined up all of the service providers that are going to be working in their app, through their app. They even have some people who are interested in using the service, but they haven't been able to build the app themselves. So they can find someone that they can pay to build the app, or they can bring them in as let's say a co-founder. And if that someone is an actual other business, then the business becomes a partial shareholder in the startup and takes a certain amount of equity in exchange for creating the product and giving it to the startup. At that point, that's when it's really good for program organizers, acceleration program organizers, to assist with this. That's where non-disclosure agreements or any other agreement around the IP, the intellectual property, that's when those agreements come in very, very handy. And that's when it's really important, because you're dealing with an external entity that is going to be both understanding all of the technology and the technological sort of secrets that the startup has, but also they're going to be building it. So then it's very, very appropriate to use an NDA between the two parties, so that they can really, open all their cards and explain everything that they need and have those needs covered in the right way without any risk of that leaking out to competitors. So I'm going to stop right here for a few minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break and, get up, stretch your legs, get some more coffee, some water. I know some people may have to leave. Nice to see you all here. And again, if there's any questions, please feel free to throw them out either in the chat or bring them up. We can raise hands, and I'm happy to have a discussion too. It's kind of hard to sit here and listen to yourself talk for 3 hours. It's nice to hear other people's voices as well. So we'll take a quick break and I'll see you guys back in 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Is everybody back now? We'll give you a couple more minutes. There she is. Hi, Annie.
Hello, how are you? Sorry for being late. 5 minutes late, sorry.
No problem at all. I said we'll give people a couple more minutes. These long nights are tricky. It's important to have, and you're still in the office too, so.
Yes, I am ready.
Okay. Looks like folks are here. All righty. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this next slide here, just because I have a few stories to tell, and I think it's really, really important to get this message across. So bear with me. I'll share my screen. Okay, so one of the things that is common, let's say, and somewhat troublesome when we're talking about startup accelerators has to do with how much publicity can, how much the role of publicity plays, both for the startups and for the program itself. And publicity is a great thing because it's really, it's important to get not just the startup founders excited about being in the program, but also the community that's around you, your supporters in general, people who may not know that this kind of a program is happening, anyone who might benefit from it in the future. It's important to generate a lot of positive buzz around acceleration programs. And that's natural and normal. And as I said, it's good, and you should definitely build it into your marketing plan as an acceleration program. On the other hand, publicity for individual startups is a little bit of a trickier proposition. And that's because ideas change multiple times, concepts change multiple times, and the nature of an acceleration program is change. Many times teams come in with one idea and they leave with an entirely different product, because the process of the acceleration program is designed to put them in touch with reality. When we come in and we just have a great idea in our heads, or maybe it's a great idea on paper, we come in and we have not necessarily done all the right research that we need to do, or we haven't gotten a full extent of feedback from the market. And a lot of times that feedback and the process of the acceleration program, as I said, is what causes us to change, which is good, right? Because we need to stay in touch with reality. We need to change our ideas and have our ideas fit reality, not try and fit reality into our concept or our product. So many times, if startups have a lot of publicity in the very, very beginning, that does there are two unfortunate results. And this is not true all the time, but I've certainly seen it happen multiple times. The one unfortunate result of premature publicity is that it really kind of inflates the minds of the founders, as well as inflating the expectations of the public who receive the publicity, right, around something which has not been proven yet. And so it's very, very difficult for early stage founders, it's very difficult to take a step back from the kind of positive, happy feeling of, wow, we got written up in the newspaper and people really liked our ideas and they heard us on the radio, and that must mean that it's really great, that it's really successful. And then when they go out and do market research in the right way, and they're actually getting real actionable feedback from the market, from their potential customers, and that feedback doesn't agree with their initial idea, it's very hard for them to release that sense of confidence that they got from the early publicity. And it can cause them to want to fit reality into their startup's idea instead of the other way around, as I mentioned a second ago. The other thing is that it makes it very difficult for them to change, even if they want to change, because they've kind of burned the idea already in the public. No one's going to listen to the new version of it, right? They're all like, wait, you guys were talking about this and now you want to do that? Why? So it creates some very difficult and frustrating conundrums for the startup founders. And I'll give you a good example of this. Several years ago, we were working with a kind of a mini acceleration program, and it was for very early stage founders. And one of the teams was developed, they were working on a small personal security device. And it was specifically targeted for women because they were, kind of a vulnerable population with pickpockets. And the program, this mini acceleration program, had the support of several local organizations who really wanted to get credit for the fact that they were supporting entrepreneurialism and so forth through the program. So they did a lot of press releases, and the press release, I think the second one that came out after the program started, talked about all the different early stage startup teams that we had, and mentioned exactly what each team was working on. So they sent the press releases out to the media, and all of a sudden, the founder, the young woman who is the founder of this particular startup, started getting phone calls from television stations that wanted to interview her on their daily talk show programs about her amazing new security device that was going to protect women from pickpockets. And the problem with that was that it sort of, the publicity validated the idea instead of the market validating the idea. And no matter how hard they tried to, because they found out through the course of the program, they found out that, well, we need to slightly change this, and technologically we need to do that. And they hadn't even built the product yet. There was no prototype at that point. There was just the basic sort of sketch and certain ideas and a little bit of coding that had happened, but no actual real product. And so all this media attention really kind of burned them in the beginning, and they had a very difficult time changing and evolving the product to suit the needs of the market and the needs of their business plan. People had heard about them and kind of got stuck in their minds with the old version of what they were doing. And so it was very hard for them to get other actual users and funding entities interested in the new version of their product. So publicity is something that is, we sort of treat it with caution. It's definitely a double-edged sword. Like I said, you can expose something before they're at a real kind of mature level in their concept and their prototype, and that early exposure will burn it. And it can cause founders to lose their focus too. In this case, the founders stayed very, very focused on their product, but it led to other difficulties as well. And finally, if you have any kind of a product or a solution that has the potential to be patented, then if you expose anything about it publicly, especially if that exposure takes the form of anything in print, then it can jeopardize the ability to patent the solution. So it's important to counsel your founders to wait a little longer before they try and generate any sort of publicity around their idea. Now, what can be a good thing with publicity is if there's some way to use the publicity process to get feedback or validation from the market that is specifically useful for one thing. So for instance, if you're trying to find out the number of people who suffer from a certain disease, let's say, and your startup is working on a solution for that disease, if there's some way that you can use the publicity process to get lots and lots of people to respond to a survey, let's say, or maybe you put up a survey on Facebook, and the publicity that you get from an article actually leads people to that survey. That can be a very positive thing because it's useful. It gives the start of actual actionable information. And so that's kind of a caveat here to the issue with publicity. Now, we have several more slides here that are a little more general, which I will go through. But before we do that, I want to show you one other video just to kind of shake things up a little bit. Because this is talking about startup accelerators from the standpoint of a founder. All right, so I'm going to stop the share on that one and switch back over to YouTube real fast.
I am a child of startup accelerators. Slidebean has received investments from Startup Chile, Dream Adventures, and 500 Startups. I started my first company in 2011, and I had no idea how startups worked. When I say no idea, I mean it. I had never heard of venture capital, never heard the concept of an angel investor. I was just out of college in Costa Rica, where the startup ecosystem was pretty much non-existent. Still, our company then was accepted by Dream Adventures in New York, which sparked a chain of events that led us to you watching this video today. So the point here is I know my way around the startup world because Dream It was a crash course in how the startup ecosystem works. It was also a soft landing in New York City that allowed me to build a network. And one of the people responsible for this is Steve Barsh, who you probably remember as a guest for some of our videos. Steve gave the intro talk at the program, and I remember Steve's talk distinctively, as it indeed was the beginning of the journey for me. So today I'll be chatting with Steve about how Dream It had to pivot their model. I'll be using some excerpts of our full conversation, but if you want to hear the full story, you can find that full episode on our Company Forensics podcast. Link in the description and available on Spotify and all the podcast platforms. Also, starting today, Steve has joined our new expert network. So you'll be able to book him for office hours for free if you're on a Founders Edition plan, or on demand if you don't have a Slidebean account. But anyway, back to the story. The first company that I founded failed to raise capital, and so did 13 out of the 15 companies in that Dream It batch. But it was thanks to that experience that I have anything to say about how fundraising works. And in fact, it was the time that sparked the initial idea for Slidebean. But just like that first company failed, the Dream It program, the Dream It accelerator system failed and had to learn the hard way, the stuff that worked and the stuff that didn't. The 2010s decade saw a spring of startup incubators and startup accelerators trying to copy the successful Y Combinator model, but many of them didn't survive. The others had to pivot, and that's what we'll be talking about today. But first, let's understand the concept of the standard accelerator. Usually, an accelerator is a 3 to 4 month in-person program. 10 to 30 companies share the same office space. There's a small investment in the companies ranging from $15,000 to $50,000 in exchange for 5 to 10% equity. There are office hours with experts and investors in the program, and it all ends with a demo day. Let's talk about that accelerator model, because I was one of those traditional accelerator, and it was an amazing soft landing into how startups work. That's why I believe that this idea of bringing all the founders together into the same office, creating this sort of community, is this accelerator crash course of 3 months. But obviously, if you guys moved away from that, and I believe that at that time, this is 2012 when I did Dream, you could find a list of hundreds of accelerators trying to do that same thing, and you see less of that now. I perceive that model as game-changing for my journey as an entrepreneur. Sure. But from the accelerator side, it doesn't seem to have worked that well for many of them. So what happened?
Again, at the end of the day, we now consider ourselves a venture investor. How do we find the best startups from around the world? How do we work with them? How do we invest in them? So part of that in the journey like that you went through with us in 2012 and what's evolved, part of it is a lot of our thinking has evolved as to what stage of startup do we want to really work with? Like, we really enjoy working with startups that already have product now and are in early traction or early revenue. Like, most startups that come into Dream It today are 2 to 3 years old. Most have probably raised around $250,000 to $500,000 already. And they have product, they have either early revenue or early traction.
So the problem seems to have been around success rate. Most of the companies I shared the office space with were very early and many even pre-product. For these companies, myself included, this capital injection from the accelerator was oxygen, runway, and some time to develop their product. So what was Dream It accelerating then? Well, trying to accelerate their access to capital. The program mostly focused on building up to demo day with the hope of meeting investors to raise an actual round. However, the reality of startups has changed. These days, companies are meeting VCs post-revenue, post-traction. It seems that it's just too risky to bet on 15 idea stage companies. Even though valuations are higher with post-revenue companies, the success rate also goes up significantly. And this is why the bootstrapping part of building a business is so important, which of course extends to the skills in your team. You need to be able to get to that fundable milestone on your own.
So instead of saying, well, we'll give you an upfront check for $100,000, but we want 6% of your company, which is like a 2.2 million valuation. We say we're going to do a completely different offer and a different structure, but it's because we're talking to a different type of company. And sometimes the founder will say to us, hey, wait, could you give us 100,000? Sure. And it's almost like an IQ test. If they'd sell 6% of their company for $100,000, that's a bad sign if they're willing to make that decision, because that's a really crappy valuation. It really is.
There are few accelerators who are still operating on that model, the smaller check, the smaller valuation. Should entrepreneurs still go for those accelerators?
I think if, maybe there's an accelerator out there that's really tuned for what they're doing. Maybe they're doing something that's in fintech or insurtech, and there's an accelerator that has a deep edge in that. Maybe there's some other value you're going to get out of that accelerator, possibly. I don't know. And I have to tell you, I have a very strong bias here. I think less than 5% of quote unquote accelerators around the world add any substantial material value to a startup.
You touched on a few things on the location of the companies and the stage and the age of entrepreneurs. I want to go back to that. Is late 20s, early 30s an ideal age for a number of reasons as to start a company or the type of entrepreneur or founder that you guys aim for?
We don't aim for an age, a race, a religion, a nothing. It's just what comes at us, right? And I think what tends to happen, again, we had an entrepreneur start Dream It a few years ago, and she couldn't go out to the bar with us because she wasn't 21, right? So it's kind of funny. It's like, we're about to serve alcohol. Like, wait, how old are you? I'm just turning 20. Like, oh God, we can't serve you alcohol. So we work with younger entrepreneurs. I think when you look at some really interesting studies, some of the most successful startups have been founded by people in like their mid to late 30s. And the reason why, it's when people have been working and toiling away in the industry really down deep and seen a problem that's really bothering them. So that classic, like you start it in your dorm room and you move out of there and you build a company. I mean, I did that, right? I literally started a company. I was still at University of Michigan. It was my senior year. That does happen. But you see a lot of successful companies are people a little bit later in their career because they experienced something and they just said, I can't take it anymore, which tends to be people a little bit more in their later 20s or early 30s after they've got 5 or 10 years of deep domain experience and they really find a pain point that they want to go after.
We get this question a lot, by the way, and I couldn't agree more with Steve's point. Yes, you can start a company at any age, but your chances increase drastically once you've had some real world experience and gather some real world insights that few people have. That's the way you come up with significant business opportunity. Another point I wanted to touch on the whole distance and the whole remote versus hybrid program is there's the Valley is quite amazing, where you have all these companies, all these people, experts in get the new company and sort of bring that knowledge, right? So there's widespread knowledge of other startup communities, investors, and so on. So there's that community, and people long for or aspire to moving to, probably top of the list of Silicon Valley, maybe New York and Austin are coming up next. But you guys go with this approach of, don't move to this location. You don't have to be here. You can get away with not being here.
Sure, absolutely.
And I'm asking for the audience that is not based in California or New York or Austin or Philadelphia. Like, right. How can these guys access or start untapping or start exploring those networks that are physically in places where they're not?
First of all, can I tell you the vast majority of the companies that come to Dream It are from New York, Austin, Silicon Valley, and the Pacific Northwest, like Seattle. So all those cities you're mentioning, that's where so many companies are like, I want to go through Dream It because I need to go faster. I'd say 50% of the companies that we have come from those areas that you're talking about. So that's one thing. I think for companies, there's a couple things I get kind of passionate about for companies that aren't in those core areas. First of all, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Certainly living and building a company in Silicon Valley, there are challenges to that. I find a lot of engineers that are in those companies are always jumping to the next hot, shiny thing. And where are my better stock options? And it can be a very ephemeral relationship. It's a very expensive relationship, right? Your cost of living is very high. Your cost of talent is extremely high. Your quality of living, everybody I know during the pandemic, they're like, oh my God, I'm working from home, saving an hour and a half from commuting every single day. So those areas do come with a penalty. But one of the things I want to talk about that we see a lot of startups lament, I guess might be a really good word, is the lack of capital. So I'm in some region of Florida, I'm in Illinois, I'm outside Chicago, I'm not in one of those primary tech hubs. How can I possibly raise capital? Let's just dive into that for a minute. One of the things I say to startups is I call bullshit on them, right? If you've got such a great startup, you've got such a great idea, don't tell me that there's no local capital and that's why you can't get it funded. Because if you're in Minot, North Dakota, and you probably don't know where that is, and I barely know where Minot, North Dakota is, but if you had the cure for cancer and you were a startup based in Minot, North Dakota, and you had the cure for cancer, and by the way, no offense to those people that are from Minot, right? Do you think that company would get funded? 100%. It's the cure for cancer. So don't blame it that your local ecosystem doesn't have the capital to fund your company. Get on an airplane, whether you want to do it during a pandemic or not, set up a Zoom video meeting, get on a JetBlue. One of the things I said to startups, look, if you stop your Starbucks habit for about a month, right, for $4 a day for a month, it's 120 bucks. Fly from Miami to Boston, right? It'll cost you 120 bucks. Stay in an Airbnb for a couple bucks and go pitch 5 VCs in Boston. And if you've got a great thing, you will get funded. But when you find that you're having trouble getting the meeting and booking the meeting and you can't get funded, maybe the problem isn't the local capital. Don't blame it on, well, there's no local money. That's why I can't be successful startup. I call foul on that. Then go travel, get in your car and drive in your Prius and go pitch investors in a bigger city.
Just to add a comment to that, we did exactly that. We started the company in Costa Rica, made it cheaper, lived here,
right,
until we had something we could launch and use. And then we moved to New York and aimed at operating the company from there. And we keep both offices.
One of the things we look at Dream It, by the way, is entrepreneurs and startups that are clever on more than one axis. Like, oh, I've got a great product. And we'll be like, and what else? Because we find a lot of times for startups to be successful, you have to be clever in more than one way. You're being clever in more than one way, right? You're running an arbitrage between Costa Rica and New York City. You're arbitraging talent and location and rent, all kinds of things.
All right, so I hope that was useful. If you want to hear more of Steve's fantastic points, listen to the full interview in our podcast. Once again, link in the description and available on Spotify. Remember, you can book Steve for office hours. And remember to hit that subscribe button if you want to stay tuned to our content. We'll see you next week.
Okay. So several things come up as a result of that video. And I kind of wanted to start by asking you guys, there was just a little bit of background. The startup founder who was there, he's the founder of a company called Slide Bean. They actually do a lot of help for entrepreneurs and for startup founders. So they have mentors and other things. You can find them on LinkedIn or check their website and stuff. And they have a subscription service for startup founders, among other things. But so there were several things that I kind of wanted to point out about that video, and it not necessarily what they were talking about, but definitely how they were talking. But before I do, I wanted to hear from some of you guys. Or does anybody have an impression about the video? What did you think watching it? How did you feel about the people that were
trying to say everything very shortly?
They were speaking very quickly. That's true.
Yeah.
Cornelia, did you want to say something? Annie?
Sorry. I just wanted to say that they were very, very confident, and they definitely know what they want, how they want. So the confidence, no matter what they were speaking, but the vibes of confidence, I could feel for sure.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Also, I think that they have no good communication. See, now and then they have the difficulties in process of when they negotiated these issues.
Possibly, yeah. Anybody else? Comments, impressions? Well, my impressions when I first saw this video, now again watching it again with you all, Ani, I agree with you completely. They are very confident, as American men in the startup culture tend to be. But this is true through pretty much all over the world as well. I can tell you, having experience on both continents, both here in Europe, throughout Europe, and in the United States, there is a lot of confidence, and in many ways, that confidence actually extends into arrogance. And that arrogance is both a function of and a functional tool. Let's say it is and I say this for those of you who are interested in working with startups, in helping foster entrepreneurship and so forth. The culture around entrepreneurship is one of by necessity. It demands confidence. Building a business is a very difficult and sometimes frustrating thing. You definitely need a lot of stamina. You need to believe very, very strongly in what you're doing, and really want to see it succeed. Definitely, there are many sacrifices that are required, both in terms of time and resources and money. And a lot of entrepreneurs talk about the sacrifices that they've made in terms of their families, and not spending the time with their children, with their partners and spouses, sometimes with their parents and so forth. So there are a great deal of parts to building a business that demand a huge commitment on the part of the entrepreneur. And in order for that commitment to be realized, you have to be really confident in what you're doing, right? You got to believe in it a lot, because if you don't believe in it, then you're not going to make the sacrifices or really push it forward. On the other hand, that confidence can sometimes blind you to certain things. So it's very important that that as an organizer of a program, that you learn to kind of see beyond the confidence and really recognize, okay, is this a function of actual progress that's being made in the company, or is it a function of some other kind of external factor, let's say? So maybe, for instance, they're getting a lot of really positive feedback from the market. That's great. That's a very good source of confidence. If they're getting a lot of I won't call it artificial, but let's say boosts from people who are kind of cheerleading. Cheerleading as far as, yeah, I know you can do it, keep it up, what you're doing is really, really important, that's great. That's a good kind of cheerleading. When it's cheerleading that's about things that have not been proven yet, I'm going back to the idea of proof from the market, right? Proof from your positive customers and so forth. Or if the cheerleading is trying to kind of boost them when the evidence from the market or from their potential customers or users, when the evidence is coming in wrong and they're getting a lot of external boosting or even internal boosting that goes contrary to that evidence, then it's our job as program organizers to really kind of check them on that. Okay, now going back to the video, that confidence, and in some of their comments, I would definitely say, especially on the part of the program organizer, there was a definite kind of arrogance that came across from him in the way that he was talking. And that's a very common trait that you'll hear from people who have money, to fund startups with, right? It's very easy for them to kind of dismiss the difficulties that some founders are dealing with, and say, well, you know what, the point about stopping your Starbucks habit for a month and saving the money to get on a plane and go pitch your startup, I definitely agree with, right? Because we can all make choices, and those choices sometimes can be seen in the context of building our business because we're sacrificing something else. So that's really good. But the kind of dismissive attitude sometimes that you will find from people who are on the other side of the business building thing, let's say, whether they're mentors or funders or even, program organizers or so forth, that can often be something that will intimidate certain founders. And especially if it's startup founders who don't have a huge degree of confidence in what they're doing. They may be super skilled and super correct and really have what it takes to build the business, but they may not exude that huge amount of confidence. Or maybe they're just, sort of more introverted. There are different kinds of people. And sometimes as an organizer, it's our job to kind of run interference between different personalities. So if you have folks that are coming in as supporters or funding entities or whatever, and their approach is either in terms of communication or negotiation or other things, and their approach is really, really kind of, I'm the VC and we've got all this money and you aren't working hard enough and so forth. Excuse me. Sorry, that's my son. It's important as a program organizer that you can kind of run interference between that, and definitely educate the founders as to what to expect before they're in contact with those kinds of people, but also kind of be there and have their backs as well, so that if they're in a situation where the communication is not going well, or there's something that's being taken, maybe out of context the wrong way, that you can kind of either mediate or give them a better perspective to kind of keep them grounded. I don't know if that makes sense or not. But as a program organizer, it's really your job is to navigate between a lot of different kinds of personalities and different functional roles, right? So the VC has a very specific functional role, and that is to evaluate the monetary potential of the startup, right? Because if they're going to give money, they're expecting money back. And so their job is to come in and pretty quickly say, yeah, I think this is going to work, and I think it's worth money, and I think it's going to make me money, so I'm going to fund it, right? And they may be very, very blunt about that. The role of the startup founder, of course, is to convince them of that. Anyway, sometimes you have issues with personalities or types of communication and so forth, but that kind of super confident, very just quit your Starbucks habit and get on a plane and go do this. That is a very common thing. The more involved in the startup sort of world you become, you see more and more of that. And so it's to be expected, but it's also our job as organizers to help people deal with it, because not everybody is able to kind of stomach that stuff. So they did raise a couple other very, very important points. One has to do with the age of founders. What's the ideal age for a startup founder? And as they said in the video, but also as my experience has shown very, very strongly, there is no ideal age. It has to do with what people have what has gotten them to the idea of starting a business. That's the most important thing, whether that's a question of experience, experiencing a problem firsthand enough times that they feel that they really can solve that problem, experiencing a need, or seeing a need in a widespread area, wide enough spread way that they feel that there is definitely a desire for their solution, there's space for their solution to that need to come in. What all those things have to do with who the person is and who the founder is when they come to your program. And so again, when we're setting it up, digging into that, how did you decide to pursue this? Where did this idea come from? What's your experience here? Why do you want to solve this problem? Those kinds of questions will help us identify whether or not this is, this founder is ready to go off and solve this problem. So it has much more to do with who and where they are than how old they are, and where their idea is coming from, because that's often something that will happen in very early stage ecosystems. People will say, well, I really want to be an entrepreneur, so how do I get a good startup idea? I've heard that question many, many times. And, the answer that we always give is, well, you don't need a good startup idea. You need a need, right? Or a desire. So finding a problem that people have that can be solved, a need that they have that can be addressed, or a desire that they have that you can fulfill. Those are where the ideas come from. And we'll get much more deeper into that kind of idea generation and the tools that we use for those later on. So I'll go back to our slides here in Acrobat. So we left off with publicity and the dangers, sort of the pitfalls, as you will, of too much publicity or too early publicity. In general, the program is going to grow as the ecosystem grows, right? So that your acceleration program can play a kind of starting role in jumpstarting a startup ecosystem. Or if the ecosystem is already kind of well established, then you can come in at that same level and it will grow together, and one will catalyze the other. And there sort of will be a dissemination of knowledge and an osmosis that goes on between the acceleration program, between the different supporters and helpers, between the startup teams and all of that will kind of extend out into the ecosystem and provide a longer lasting benefit there. Depending on the degree of maturity of the ecosystem, you will want to design your program accordingly. So if the ecosystem doesn't have a lot of support structure already established, or there haven't been a lot of startups there, that have already come out of the ecosystem and so forth. And again, we're talking about businesses that are either scalable or local. Either one of those is fine, but understanding what the degree of maturity, business maturity, right, entrepreneurial maturity within the ecosystem is really important to consider all that when you're setting up and designing the program itself. And along with that is in the design phase, developing good, solid working relationships with any kind of local business angels, or sometimes there's business angel groups, or business angel funds even, or very, very early small VC funds, right? Those kinds of let's say, lower level funding entities, they're not super high end, millions and millions of euros venture capital funds necessarily, but they do have investment money available. Those kinds of early stage funding entities are much more likely to invest in good cases that will come out of an early stage acceleration program. So the idea is you don't want to set up an acceleration program for very, very early stage startups and then expect to get funding from later stage entities. It's important to match the phase of the startup with the kind of money that they're going to be trying to raise and the expectations that those investors have. As we said, publicity is really important, but needs to be timed very well. And someone from the acceleration program should be the kind of the middleman that's managing that publicity, managing the communications with different kinds of outlets and media outlets and so forth, so that it's actually working on behalf of the program overall and for the startups in the most appropriate way for each startup, avoiding the mistakes that we discussed earlier. There's another good part of having an acceleration program has to do and growing the ecosystem overall has to do with some mini events that can happen in the context of an acceleration program. And those kinds of mini events, they give a lot of exposure from the startups or gives exposure from the participants to the startups, let's say if it's a presentation or whatever. But it can also support the creation of the community, both within the acceleration program and at large. If you can open those events up to the public, then it's not just for the startups, it's also for other people who are interested. They may not be starting their own business, they may not be building their own business, but they may have a desire to learn about the particular topic or just hear from the speaker. So you can bring in representatives of more advanced companies. Are you guys seeing this? You're seeing my screen, correct?
No.
Oh.
No, we are.
I'm just talking away here and nobody's seen my screen. Okay. Well, there we go. Now, this is
yes.
Before. That was publicity. All right. working relationships with business angels and angel groups, ecosystem maturity. Okay, and then this is kind of the introductory that we did. So again, you guys can go back and see these slides. They're all in the presentations that are shared on the site. So again, apologies for that. Okay, so what kinds of topics would you have for mini events, right? They can be, you know, as I said, you can bring in more advanced startups or scale-ups, or even much larger companies that can talk about either how they've built their own solutions, or sometimes, you know, they can talk about how certain problems that they have. So that will, especially if those companies have a good relative topic or relative problem, excuse me, with some of the startups that are in your program, right? Then you can, you know, you can really kind of give them some food for thought. So bring in companies that are in the area, or, you know, in the country, that representatives from those companies can talk about how they handled a specific problem, how they're solving a specific problem, and what's wrong with that current solution. It gives the startups a way of saying, oh, okay, well, I know how to solve that, and I know how to solve it better, right? So those kinds of events are very valuable. Another kind that's another type of event that is really useful for startups has to do with how to protect your intellectual property. Because one of the things that, if you're talking about a tech startup especially, one of the things that's very important from a funding perspective is if I'm an investor, I want to know that the intellectual property that your company has, whether that's computer code, whether it's some kind of a design for a product, whatever the secret to making your solution competitive, I want to know that that is both protected, meaning no one else can have access to your computer code, right? Or if, for instance, by a or the design to your device, let's say, for instance, you know, that's protected by a patent. Or I want to know that at least that you have the protection, you know, within your company, that certain access points are controlled, so that the keys to that competitiveness, the keys to your intellectual property aren't just available to anyone. Another great topic to have an event on is growth hacking, right? Which has to do with how do you come up with quick and dirty and economical ways to grow your customers, right? Or grow the users of your product. So there's a lot of companies that have specialized in it, or they've done it. They've learned the hard way, let's say, that may be able to come in and help out your startups and say, you know, give them some tips and tricks and save them a lot of time and trouble. Obviously, an event about how to raise funding is important, where you bring in an investor that talks about what they're really, really looking for. As I mentioned before, technology issues with prototyping. So that has to do with, you know, any kind of technological tutorials. People can come in and actually, you know, really show people, okay, this is how you need to build this, or this is the process that you need to go through when you set up your alpha testing and your beta testing and so forth. And finally, startup governance is a really good topic as well, because the governance has to do with how the business is set up, what kinds of decisions are made, and in what way are they made by the founders, and then later by the, you know, if the company brings in more shareholders, what the involvement of those shareholders will be, and so forth. And so governance is a really, really tricky topic that most founders don't pay a lot of attention to. And many times it is something where they kind of set up their company, they have a lawyer write up the bylaws, they don't pay too much attention to what it says in there. And then when it comes time for them to make a very important decision, they have to go back and read the procedures that they've set up in their bylaws, follow those procedures, and maybe decide that, you know what, we don't want to make our decisions with a simple majority. We want to make our decisions with, you know, a majority of 75% of the shareholders, or issues like that. So having a good, experienced lawyer and or startup founder who's done it a couple times come in and talk about issues of governance is very, very helpful to early stage teams. I think what we're going to do now, we'll take another quick break because the last section for today deals with impact, both in terms of the impact that an acceleration program can have and also the idea of impact accelerators. So let's take another quick 10-minute break here. This is a good stopping point. And then we'll come back and we will deal with impact. Does that sound good? Okay, well, I'm gonna say it's 9 minutes before 7 local time, Moldova time, and so we will pick it up again at 7:02. All righty, see you back in a few minutes. Okay. Did you guys make it back yet? There she is. There he is. Hi, everybody. All righty. We've got another hour here, and if I'll try and leave some time for questions at the end, although you guys aren't talking too much today. Hopefully there will be a few more questions after this. Let me share my screen real quick. Oops, there we go. Back to the slides. I'm going to switch back and forth here a little bit. I'm wondering, have any of you had any exposure to the concept of impact when it comes to analyzing businesses? Anybody? No. Okay. Let me switch over then real fast. I want to, sorry, there's in the chat. Okay, Victoria, would you like to say anything about how you look at the impact of a business?
Hello, everyone. We have we do this impact in a smart project when we elaborate the idea for business, and our students give us model canvas.
The business model canvas. And what kind of how are they measuring the impact, or how do they look at the impact that the business is having?
We calculated the benefits, the expenses, and the net profit.
Okay,
and we measured the impact on the social impact on the location where they do implement this idea. They implemented
the implementation of the idea. Correct.
Yes.
Okay, well, impact is something that is getting quite a lot more attention now. Our world is faced with a lot of very, very large and difficult challenges, whether we're talking about the climate and the environment, health challenges, many different kinds of global issues. And so there's a lot more attention being paid to how a business, especially a new business that's being designed and built, how that business can have a positive impact somehow on society, as well as, how can existing businesses improve their impact so that they're having either a less negative or a more positive impact on society. So I want to take a quick break from the slides in our presentation and switch over to another quick presentation, which we will upload as supplemental material. This is not in the official course content, but since we're going to cover it now as good background, I think, for those of you who don't have experience with the idea of impact, I think it's important that we spend a little time there. So I will switch over to a different presentation real fast. And as I said, we will share these with you guys for sure on the platform. And now this has to do with something specific that we call social enterprise. Okay. And if this, in fact, may be useful also as you're organizing or as you're running acceleration programs, because sometimes people will want to do, they will want the kind of startup that they will want to build is in particular a social enterprise, which means that it has a specific and stated goal to have a positive social impact. But in general, when we talk about the impact of any kind of a business, whether it's a social enterprise or a regular startup enterprise, we want to look at certain kinds of metrics. So we want to look at the return on investment, right? This is when we're talking about businesses that are run on a specifically for-profit way, meaning the business is being built with the sole goal of generating profit, right? So in that sense, we look at the return on the investment. Okay, we want to look at how much money they're bringing in, how much profit they're generating, how much and how much the costs are in terms of their, the business's staff, the operation, and so forth. But then also what their customers, how satisfied their customers are. All of those things we look at, and we look at that in the sense of how much money has been invested into the company and how much of a return is coming back from that investment, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of reputation and so forth. When we look at the social impact of a company, okay, we look at what's called the social return on the investment, not just the return on the investment, but the SORI, the social return. And that kind of thing is measured both in terms of quantitative numbers, as we said, like just with the same as with the for-profit company, okay, quantitative numbers meaning revenue, profit, expenses, and so forth. But it's also measured with qualitative factors. So we look at, the same kind of quantitative metrics that we're checking in a for-profit business, along with some qualitative indicators, meaning we want to look at what's called the triple bottom line. So we want to look at the profit that the company is making, but we want to also look at how that profit is helping the people and the planet. Okay, so we understand how the company or the startup is enriching people both monetarily as well as enriching their lives and also making the planet healthier. Okay, so there's a lot of challenges when we're measuring the impact of something. It's more difficult because you have both the social along with the financial and the environmental values that you're trying to understand. So what we call SORI, the social return on investment, is actually trying to measure value that's created outside of the venture itself. One way to start understanding the idea of impact is looking at how we describe what a business is accomplishing. And I really like this slide because it really shows, as it says, the essence of change, of how a situation changes. So here on the left-hand side, it says 80 children who dropped out are now going to school again. Okay, that's a very good measurement. We now see that 80 children dropped out of school and now they're back in school. So that tells us, yes, something positive is happening here. If you look at it a little deeper, you will see on the right-hand side here, it says 80 girls went back to school again because they have separate toilets now. So what does that tell us? That says that we understood who were the students that were dropping out of school, right? Who were they? They were girls. What caused them to drop out of school, meaning they did not have separate facilities, separate bathroom facilities, okay? And by fixing that problem, we brought them back to school. So there's much more information in the statement on the right that allows you to understand the actual overall impact that business or venture or initiative had on the situation, right? Because we understood the underlying causes of the problem or the need, and we were able to fix that. That lets us know that it was a success. It had a successful impact. On the left-hand side, we know that something that happened, resulted in it was a good result, a good end result. So there was an impact, but we don't know why. And understanding why is really the key to being able to maintain impactful results. So the way that we measure impact, this just says social enterprise business models, but I wanted to just alert you to these 4 factors: input, output, outcome, and impact. And so what happens is we start by looking at what are the inputs that are going into the organization, what are the inputs, what are the resources that you're putting as a business that you're putting into what you're trying to do. So those are financial resources, right? They can be direct or indirect resources. They're operational resources, meaning that you're putting, you're operating the business. resources in terms of time, either for staff or the volunteers that are involved, and resources in terms of expertise. And the way that we measure input is very simple. We look at how many hours were devoted, how much money was needed to do that, all of those things. These are very, very easy to measure, these things, these inputs. So it's anything that's going into the business to generate the result of that business. Next, we look at the outcome. So the outcome has to, or sorry, excuse me, the output, right? The output has to do with what the business produced or the initiative, okay? So if we have a social enterprise that is trying to train workers, right? We trained 200 people last year, okay? We put this many hours in and we got these many people trained, all right? So again, these are very, very simple things to measure, okay? They don't address the impact or the value of what you're doing on the people who receive that, whether it's customers or people that you're training or so forth. So input is what you put into the business, output is what comes out, is what is the result of that input. And finally, we look at outcome, okay? So the outcome shows, outcomes prove that a change has occurred because of your program, okay? Outcomes are the effect that your program has on the people or issues that you serve or address. And typically the kinds of questions that we ask to figure out, to look at outcome are, did the participants, if it's a job program, let's say, did they raise their skill levels, right? Did the training lead to employment? And finally, as a result of that employment, has their social position improved? Okay, so these are all about measuring what we call performance levels, right? And it requires a lot more time and a lot more energy on the part of the founders or whoever's evaluating the business or the program to really kind of dig deep into those questions and get the information, right? Because if you're talking about an acceleration program, let's say, right, we can run these metrics for an acceleration program. We can say how much, what are the inputs that are necessary to run this program, right? How much money do we need to set it up? How many people do we need to run the program? How many of those people need to be paid and how many can be volunteers? Do we need to bring in outside consultants? Do we need to have another organization come and help us, right? All of those things are the inputs into an acceleration program. Then we look at the outcomes, or the outputs of an acceleration program. So that's right. How many startups did we serve? We ran 2 cycles last year, and each cycle had 15 startups. Okay. And at the same time, we had, in both of those cycles, we had a total of 20 mini events, and those mini events attracted 200 people from throughout the community. Of the 30 people that started that began the program, 22 of them finished the program. Okay, so those kinds of metrics we can run on an acceleration program as well. And then we get to outcome, and we say, okay, of the 22 startups that finished the 1 year of our acceleration services, the 2 programs, right? Of those 22, 5 of them have their products in the market and they are selling and making money, right? 4 of them are still building their prototype. 6 of them got investment from outside, and so forth. So those questions we start with, and then we say, okay, how has that business or the startup founders, how have they gained something like skill level, for instance? Maybe they've changed their not necessarily their social position, but for instance, the ones who did not complete the program, or the ones whose startups did not ultimately survive, perhaps the skills that they developed in the course of the acceleration program let them get a better job at another company when their startup failed, or they were able to, instead of employing somebody else in their startup. They were able to run that part of the business themselves. So that's all about performance levels. And we can look at acceleration programs in terms of performance levels once we've answered the first two, the input and output. Finally, let's get to impact. Okay, impact is the hardest thing to measure, and it takes a long time to really see the actual impact of your program, because these are both looked at in terms of the direct or the indirect results of the outcomes from your program, right? So it's in the beginning, we can set some expectations for impact, right? There may or may not happen. It's basically what we hope that our efforts are going to accomplish. So if we're talking about a training program, let's say, for instance, graduating from a training program may eventually lead to a better quality of life for the individual, but how do you know that, right? What are the indicators of a better quality of life? How do you say, yes, this person has a better quality of life because they finished our acceleration program? What does that mean? Does it mean that they have a better salary? Does it mean that they're more skilled at what they're doing? How do you define better quality of life? And another question is, how long is it going to take for you to prove that that's actually been the example, right? I mean, that's actually been the case for your program. So an example that I have here is, let's say 500 people graduate from a training program and find jobs from there. 2 years later, 420 of them are still employed. So what is the social impact of that training program, right? What's happened? Well, we don't know is the answer. We don't know enough to tell yet, because maintaining that 420 of them, what's that, an 84% rate of them are still employed. That sounds like it had a very positive impact, but we need to, dig a little deeper and find out what kind of jobs they have. Are they steady employment? Are the jobs well paid, and so forth? So when we start thinking about impact, we come up with what we hope will be the long-term result of the efforts from our program. I'll stop this now and we'll see. Does that make sense to people? It's maybe a little too theoretical here right now, but I wanted to kind of open up this topic. Does it sound, did you understand what I was saying with that? Not a lot of responses here. Victoria, since you brought up about dealing with the impact in terms of that when you use the business model canvas, does that, do you feel like you can talk with your startups about, in the smart cafes, can you talk to any of them about kind of looking further at the impact of their own businesses?
They don't have a business, a startup. They have just
Ideas, okay.
Yes, and now with this project, we hope that those idea was a startup.
Mm-hmm.
We have just a little startup, but she is a Lycian, and she's so cute, and they don't have feedback with us just a moment. And when she is a student, we hope that we can measure the impact, and we help this.
Right. Okay. Well, the reason we can talk about this more later. I know that was a little tiny bit of a detour. I'll go back to the slides in our presentation now. But what I really was hoping to get you all thinking about is that when you're doing a program like the Smart Cafes or an acceleration program, right? That is going to the institution of the Smart Cafe, right, is going to have an impact in the broader society, in the local community, whatever, right? Not just the startups that come out of it, who hopefully will be doing good things and having an impact themselves, but in terms of helping to broaden entrepreneurship and build more businesses in society, you can look at the Startup Accelerator, the Smart Cafe, as a way of having, as a program that does have a positive impact on society. And once you start seeing or start measuring what kind of an impact your program is having on the local community, you can really make a case for increased funding from whoever your supporters are. You can make a case for, you know, better resources somehow. You can say, listen, our program hosted this many entrepreneurs last year. We had this many students come in who want to make their own business. We had this many students who were able to execute on that. And I know one of the things about the European Union when they provide funding for things is that they actually ask for these kinds of reporting. They want to know what is the impact of the money that's being spent in these places. So you're probably already starting to keep certain records and things, but you can push that a little bit further in different ways when you start thinking about a longer term result of the work that you're doing.
Yes, it's a longer term because our Smart Cafe, it's a good opportunity for students to develop this entrepreneurial competence, and it's a good idea and for local business community, because the space is big. And now in December, Mrs. Proyector Pritskan open a big business center in our country, in Moldova, and in Belt, and the space is very beautiful.
Excellent, excellent. I'm really pleased to hear that. I have my Smart Cafe mug here. Just a little bit of a push.
It's a nice.
And we're very, very pleased to hear that the Smart Cafes have taken off and are being, you know, being used and being effective. It's a really, really great result from the original program. And this program now, the Connect program, as a follow-on from that, is going to, I think, even multiply the impact that the Smart Cafes can have. So we're very, very excited that that's going on. Does anyone have questions or any comments about that? Anyone else from other experiences? Not yet. Okay, I'll go back to the slides on the regular presentation here, and we'll look a little bit more at impact. So again, this is maybe a slightly different use of the term, but what it says here, that in terms of acceleration impact, the most important benefit from participating in an acceleration program is that the kind of very, very quick result in validating your market and validating your concept. So that's one way that an acceleration program can provide a positive impact for startups, because forcing them to get out and get really, really fast and harsh sometimes feedback from the market about their concept to validate it really increases the efficiency of the process that they're going through, because they're doing it very quickly, right? They're not kind of taking their time and spending a lot of money with consultants or doing a lot of sort of half bits and pieces of research. They're actually really forced to get in and do it very, very quickly. And so there's an efficiency in the time that's used, or the time that is expended to get the results back. So the acceleration program is impacting is having an impact on the startups while they're participating in it. Another good important impact that they can provide is to, as I was saying earlier, kind of take down the emotional, not reliance, but the emotional attachment, let's say, to ideas that are maybe not viable, right? So there's a very kind of difficult moment that many entrepreneurs face when they're in acceleration programs, where they really have to read the writing that's on the wall from the market. And if the market is telling them, if they're, if their potential customers or their potential users is telling them that in fact what they're proposing isn't what they want, then if what the startup is proposing is not what the customers want, then the founders have to really, they have a very tough decision to make, which is either continue forward believing and with your emotional sort of attachment to your idea. Do you continue forward on it, or do you change? If you can, do you have the resources to change your idea to what the market really wants? And if you don't have the resources to change and pursue that, do you then give up and start maybe something different down the line? Those are difficult decisions to make, but again, as we've said multiple times, it's better to face those questions and make those decisions fast and early, rather than going 2-3 years down the road and expending the time and resources. Obviously, one very, very positive impact that acceleration programs have is increasing the possibility for funding through all the activities that we do, and also the exposure to different different funding entities. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain kinds of accelerators that specialize in startups who consider themselves either social enterprises or impact startups. Okay, so again, these are startups that are expecting to create solutions that are not only positive economically, right, good, profitable economic situations, businesses, but also have a very actively positive social impact. And by social, we can include environment and health and any other sort of factor. So different kinds of impact and accelerators will focus, for instance, on the environment or climate change. Some of them might focus on the circular economy, right, which has to do with lowering or removing waste in the cycle of production and consumption. Some kinds of impact accelerators deal with things like, reducing the dependence on animals to produce goods and food and things. So there's many different ways that an impact accelerator might focus on a particular topic. But impact accelerators will all have a similar kind of approach to measuring their impact, as what I showed you earlier in the other presentation a minute ago. And oftentimes they will differ from what we call commercial accelerators, right? Commercial accelerators, as we said, focus mainly on making profit or getting the exit. But impact accelerators, because they look at a longer term timeline, and because they measure success in a more broad kind of way, right? Sometimes they will place less importance on the pricing of the product or the affordability of the product. Sometimes, and this is what by product I mean the accelerator will look at or will instruct their startups in certain ways, right? So impact accelerators sometimes will have their startups put less importance on the pricing or the affordability of their product if their product is something that's going to have a longer term impact. So in other words, it may be more competitive than other products in its category because of its impact nature, rather than because of its price. For instance, it's not a cheaper product, but it's a better one, right? Sometimes they place lower importance on competitive advantage. Again, the advantage, it's all about how you define the advantage that the solution is. So if it's a solution for, let's say, to reduce the carbon footprint of, let's say, delivery companies, right? if the solution, if there's some kind of a tracker that can, or a routing device that can show the delivery companies how to optimize the routing. So they're delivering, let's say it's a food delivery company, right? And you know, there's guys on scooters zooming around who are just, they pick up an order in one place and they take it to another, and then they drive someplace else and pick up an order and deliver it to another. And it's just driving, which is putting out a great deal of exhaust. So it has a large carbon footprint. The service itself has a much bigger carbon footprint. So they may be very cheap. It may be the cheapest delivery service in town, but because they're not optimized in terms of being efficient in their driving, they're actually having a much larger carbon expenditure because of the exhaust. So you could say, well, okay, we're going to build a solution that will route the delivery guys much more efficiently, and they will cut down in their carbon emissions. They'll cut down in the exhaust that's coming out of their vehicles. They'll cut it down by 50%, right? Which is right there. You're measuring something that is showing an improvement. So it may be that by adopting this solution, the delivery company has to pay a little bit more money because they're buying our routing solution, right? But they are actually making a savings in the long term because they're saving on gasoline, first of all, on fuel, because it's more efficient, and they're saving in terms of how much environmental pollution they're generating. So they can use that in their marketing and in the way that they talk to their customers. And they can say to customers who are sensitive to things that, you know, to climate issues, they can say, listen, you know, we're gonna deliver your food, and it's gonna have a much lower environmental impact than the other guys, right? So that's kind of a long explanation, but you don't always have to be, if you look at things from an impact standpoint, you don't always have to be the cheapest solution. You have to bring the most value. What's important is the most value. And so how do you measure value is the key issue there. So sometimes impact accelerators will spend a lot of resources helping their teams understand the various levels of value that they're providing to their customers. So it's not just about price or speed. It's also about, you know, a longer term impact that they're having. Okay, here's a few facts here that I'm going to finish up with this today, because we're going to go into more stuff about accelerators on Thursday. You've heard several things that have approached this as well, but typically accelerators that do provide money to their startups, it's usually an early investment of around 20 to 50,000 euros. We're talking mostly in the European area now, not so much in the United States. And typically they'll take as an exchange, you know, 5 to 10% of the company in equity. Some programs require a residency, as we said, right, which can cost the startup founders money, because they have to, if it's not in the city where they're from, they need, you know, obviously to have money to stay in the city where the program will be. Sometimes the acceleration programs can provide a lot of sort of perks or extras that can increase the value, what they call the value of their investment, by quite a lot. So those, we mentioned those yesterday, but those kind of extra value services and so forth, things like, you know, legal work or accounting, web server credits and so forth, all of those have a value, a dollar value or a euro value associated with them. And so sometimes startup accelerators will say, we invest 100,000 in your company, or let's say 50,000 euros in your company when you join our accelerator. The money, the actual cash that's given to the startup might only be half of that. The actual cash might only be 25,000 euros. And the rest of the other 25,000 is provided in services. So it's in consulting work and web server credits and so forth. So the important thing when you're designing the program, depending on what kind of an accelerator you want to design, the important thing is to think of, okay, if you have any capital to provide to the startups, how much is of that money is going to go to them? What other services are you going to provide to them? And what's the total value of the overall package? Right? It's 20,000 in cash and 20,000 in services. That means we're actually giving you 40,000 an investment. The overall investment is worth 40,000. And for that, we're asking for 5% ownership stake in your company. Okay, there's a few more facts here. One is the funnel, the acceleration funnel, which we'll talk about more later. That has to do with how many applicants apply versus how many are actually admitted. So if you have 100 applicants and you only admit 10, that's a 10% exception rate, right, of your applicants. Some of the really, really top programs in the world, you know, Y Combinator and 500 Startups and all of those will admit way less than 4%. Some of them admit like 0.4%, like that. So, but typically for early stage ecosystems, you know, you're probably going to take anywhere from 50% to, or 10% to 50% of the applicants, and then that percentage will start to go down as the ecosystem matures and more people start building businesses using an accelerator and so forth. These are statistics that have to do with the sector agnostic thing that I mentioned yesterday, meaning that, you know, startup accelerators not being focused on one particular type of technology or one particular sector of doing business, like medicine or finance. And this is, of course, this is $38,000 investment in the startups from the accelerators. Now, this is global statistics. So, you know, there are many programs, the majority of them that don't put any money into the startups. And then there are a lot of others that do. So this goes from zero to, let's say, you know, whatever, $76,000 is, or $100,000, you know, it averaged out to 38,000, but that definitely doesn't mean that the majority of startups that go into acceleration programs are getting $38,000. A couple quick facts about venture capital backed accelerators. These have larger amounts of funding typically, obviously because they've got a fund behind them. In general, startups are given low valuations in the beginning in exchange for funding that they get from a VC. So if an accelerator, if a startup goes into a VC-backed accelerator, they'll take the money and they'll take it their company will be valued quite low. So that gives the VC an advantage. We'll talk more about that later on in this module and in subsequent modules as well about how to value a startup, what kind of a number do you place on it, right? What is your company worth, and how much of that company should I give up, let's say, to somebody who wants to invest in me? These next ones have to do with a slightly different topic. So this is part B, which is going to start on Thursday. I think what we're going to do is stop here. And again, I'll ask for any questions or comments from anyone. Gianna, how do you say your name?
My name is Gayane.
Gayane.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank for the very interesting a workshop or a conference, I can say. Very interesting, very informative. Thank you very much. I'm a lecturer at Business State University, Armenia, and I'd like to comment on the impact of some businesses in my country. As a member of Armenian society, what I have noticed concerning this matter, so I can say that the impact of some businesses in my country is conditioned, stipulated by the lack of monetary investment, first of all, because the huge problem that we experience, like there are many businesses only remain in idea stage and they do not develop further because of monetary investment. In some cases, because of the lack of proper services, level of service, and professionals, so staff as well. But the main problem, the main issue in my country is the lack of monetary investment. So that's why many businesses remain in idea stage, do not develop further, and do not have impact. So this is what I wanted to comment on.
That's very true. And you know, knowing the conditions in many different countries, and understanding the difficulty of those conditions is what makes me kind of just a little uncomfortable when I hear people like the venture capitalist in the video, you know, talk about, oh, well, you know, just go get on a plane, and, you know, if you've got the cure for cancer, you'll get money, no problem. You know? And you know, there's a couple of reasons why we showed that video, but that's one of them, is so that, you know, we don't always want to show the perfect side of startups and so forth. There's a downside to it too, in the whole kind of startup ecosystem and mentality. But it's very, you're absolutely correct. It's very, very hard to have an impact if you can never get the business off the ground, right? And unfortunately, many times, especially in very early stage ecosystems, it's difficult to convince people of the value, the long-term value, and the impact that your startup can have, enough so that they will invest their money, because there's basically four ways to get the funding to start a business, right? One or five. One is, the first one, of course, is to finance it yourself, which is difficult for many people. Two is to take debt in the form of a bank loan or another, you know, loan from another person or relative or something else where you promise to repay it, with the idea that the business will generate enough profit so that you can repay the loan. The third way is to apply for public money. Sometimes, you know, there's grants that are available and so forth. And the fourth is to have an outside investor, who is either going to be, you know, an angel investor of some kind, or a professional venture capitalist of some kind, who will invest the money for specific terms, with an expectation. Now, there's no guarantees. There are no guarantees, right? But the expectation that the investor has is that they will get a certain return on their money, right? Now, when we're talking about, you know, social enterprises, let's say, or businesses that have a social component to their product, right? They want to build something that's going to help in some way. It's even harder, right? Because at that point, you have to have an investor who understands and appreciates the value of the long-term impact that you're going to be producing, right? So they not only have to believe in and accept the risk of an early stage business that may or may not succeed, right? And may or may not be profitable, at least not for quite a while, right? So they have to believe in that and accept that risk, but they also have to really be passionate about the cause that the startup is trying to work towards, right? So when you're dealing with regular for-profit businesses, it's hard enough. But when you're dealing with businesses that have a social enterprise, you know, or social component to them, to their reason for being, it's even more of a challenge to get funding. On the other hand, many times, businesses that do have a social component to them, you know, whether it's environment or society or you know, any other kind of the arts, for instance, and so forth, many times there is more public funding available towards those kinds of businesses. So as a program, as you know, for an acceleration program, one thing that's really helpful and can definitely contribute to the success of the program is if somebody on the staff is well acquainted with and well networked with the sources of funding that are not just venture capital or investors, let's say, right? But that they know very well the kinds of public grants that are available from the municipality, from the regional government, the national government, even from the European Union, right? So it's very important that we provide the founders that are in our program with a lot of different options for funding. Okay, because there's what we call non-equity or equity-free funding, right? Which means I get a grant from the municipal council, or I get a grant from the European Union, or I get a grant. That money comes in. Now I have to perform or I have to produce what I say I'm going to produce, right? In the terms of the grant, I'm applying for it to do this, so I better accomplish X, right? That I said I was going to. But the benefit is that, and there's obviously there's a detriment to that kind of program, because there's a lot of bureaucracy, right? And many times there's specific rules in these grant programs. You have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do it by this date, and it has to be done in this way, and so forth. So they come with a lot of caveats, typically grants, and those caveats many times can be limiting or constraining somehow to founders who are trying to do things, in a specific way. The trade-off, though, of course, is that you get money without giving away any of the ownership of your company. So we call this non-dilutive capital, or equity-free capital, right? So you maintain the ownership of your business longer, and you maintain more control over the business that way. But as coming from the standpoint of running a program, it's really, really good to have somebody on your team that's running the acceleration program who is very familiar with these kinds of funding opportunities, and as well understands how to write the applications for those, because the application process for grants is very, very different than writing a business plan, for instance. They will often ask for a business plan, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you have to do to write the grant procedures. So it's really good when you have when you're putting together the team who's going to run the acceleration program, to have somebody who's a specialist in those sorts of funding.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your comment. Anybody else want to say anything or have any questions? Not so far. Okay. All right. Well, it has been a long evening, and I'm starting to lose my voice here a little bit. So I think we're going to end it here. Tomorrow, just a reminder, tomorrow we don't have a live lecture. There are 2 long videos that are in the schedule that you guys can watch. At the end of the week, on Friday, I believe we will have a multiple choice quiz at the end of this module. So we'll see you back here for the live lectures on Thursday, and Friday will continue both days. And it will either be myself or my partner Argyris doing Thursdays and Fridays lectures. We haven't quite split up the schedule yet, but we will know by tomorrow. So we'll announce that as well. And like I said, please feel free to post any questions or comments that you have. We will do our very best to address them. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good evening. Stay safe,
See
everyone.
you all.
Bye. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.